Verbos ER, verbs that end in ER, or sometimes known as verbs in the second conjugation. In this lesson, we're going to focus on verbs that end in ER, and we're going to start by reviewing a couple concepts from the last lesson. The first is the idea of an infinitive. An infinitive is a verb that has both a stem and an ending, and we looked at different kinds of stems. The stem is what's not going to change in a verb. And we looked at the three kinds of endings, which are AR, ER, and IR verb endings. The word stem in Spanish is either raíz or radical. We're just going to go with radical, so we'll have one word to choose from and to use as we go through and talk about verbs over the course. The word ending in Espanol is la terminación. And we know we have three kinds of terminaciones in Espanol, AR, ER, and IR. And the three example verbs that we're going to use for each of these categories is hablar, comer, and vivir. The three infinitive types, again, are AR, words that end in AR, ER, and IR. If a word ends in AR, it's called a verb in the first conjugation, or primera conjugación. That's how they would say it in Spanish. In English, we call them AR verbs. In Spanish, they don't call them AR verbs. They call them verbs in the primera conjugación. Verbs that end in ER are verbs in the segunda conjugación, and verbs that end in IR are verbs in the tercera, or third conjugation. First conjugation verbs are a list we looked at last lesson: to form, to pass, to try, to result, and to cause. Our focus today is going to be verbs in the segunda conjugación, or ER verbs, and we're going to look at how to conjugate, how to change to depend, to comprehend, to surprise, to commit, and to sell. They're going to have a little different set of endings as we conjugate them. IR verbs are going to be the focus of the next lesson. These are called verbs in the third conjugation, or tercera conjugación. These are the words we're going to look at and understand how to conjugate by the time we finish our lesson today. We're going to turn our attention now to segunda conjugación verbs, or verbs that end in ER, like to depend, to comprehend, to surprise, to commit, or to sell. We're going to start actually with the verb comer, which is always going to be our example verb. It means to eat. As we conjugate to eat, we see the terminación in blue and the radical is in red. The radical is not going to change anywhere down there. The ending is going to be very similar to the first conjugation verbs, but a little bit different. So I eat is going to be yo como. If you're taking notes, this is a good time to get started on that and start writing these down. You eat is going to be tú comes. He or she eats is él come. We eat is nosotros comemos. You all eat, vosotros coméis, and they eat, ellos comen. You can see it's very similar to the o, as, a, amos, ais, an. In this case, because it's ER, it's o, es, e, amos, eis, and en. And there are many, many verbs that you're going to have to use this ending for, and not the one we learned in the last lesson. Let's look at another example, to depend. We see that the radical stays the same, to depend. I depend in Spanish is going to be yo dependo. Tú dependes. Él depende. Nosotros dependemos. Vosotros dependéis. And ellos dependen. That's the set of endings. It's going to stay the same for each of the ER verbs. And notice that eis has an accent over the E. If it's an ER verb, there'll be an accent on the E on eis, just like for the AR verbs had an accent on the A on the ais. Another example is to comprehend. Radical stays the same. Comprendo, tú. Comprendes, él. Comprende, nosotros. Comprendemos, vosotros. Comprendéis, ellos comprenden. Those are the endings for ERs. I want you to do this word as practice. Vender, like vendor, means to sell in Spanish. So the sujetos in English are I, you, he, we, y'all, and they. And the verb in English is going to be I sell, you sell, he sells, we sell, y'all sell, they sell. I want you to take 20 seconds and give me both the Spanish sujeto and the Spanish verbo with the correct raíz and the correct terminaciones. You should have yo vendo, I sell. Tú vendes. Él vende. Nosotros vendemos. Vosotros vendéis. And ellos venden. I sell, you sell, he sells, we sell, y'all sell, and they sell. The yo always has to have an O at the end of the verb. The tú, an es, el, y, etc. O, es, e, hemos, eis, and en. Those are the correct terminaciones for a verb in the segunda conjugación. We've seen verbs in the primera conjugación, verbos in the segunda conjugación, and we've seen the endings. The proper endings for AR verbs are o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. The correct endings for an ER verb, or a verb in the second conjugation, are o, es, e, hemos, eis, and en. And notice ais has an accent over the a, eis has an accent over the e. And to see the verb hablar fully conjugated, it's going to be hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, and hablan. I speak, you speak, he speaks, we speak, y'all speak, and they speak. And for comer, it's going to be como, comes, come, comemos, coméis, and comen. I, you, he, we, y'all, they eat. Those are the first two out of the three. The next list we're going to look at is going to be verbs in the third conjugation, or in English we would call them IR verbs. And we're going to see how to conjugate to receive, to describe, to confuse, to debate, and to add. That's the next lesson. You can see they all end in IR. As far as this lesson, we've just finished it. We've looked at verbs that end in ER or verbs in the segunda conjugación.